September 3, 1945, Camp Blanding, Florida. Margaret Hoffman pressed a bar of white soap against her face and wept. The scent of lavender mixed with her tears as 23 other German women waited their turn outside the shower block. She had forgotten soap could smell like flowers. She had forgotten skin could feel clean. But why did this small mercy from her captors hurt more than all the bombs that fell on Berlin? 6 months earlier, the world had been ending in fire and ash. Margaret stood at her post in the Luftwaffe Communications Center outside Frankfurt, her fingers trembling over the telegraph keys. The smell of burning paper filled the bunker as officers destroyed classified documents. Through the narrow ventilation shaft, she could hear American Sherman tanks grinding closer, their engines drowning out the distant artillery. "Burn everything," Major Weiss had ordered, his uniform jacket torn at the shoulder, 3 days of stubble darkening his hollow cheeks. They must find nothing. Beside her, Ilse Kramer fed maps into the flames, her blonde hair gray with concrete dust. At 19, Ilse was 2 years younger than Margaret, but the war had carved the same lines around both their eyes. They had served together since 1943, when soap was still rationed but available, when their uniforms were still properly pressed, when they still believed the broadcasts about wonder weapons and final victory. "What happens to us?" Ilse whispered, watching the flames consume the coordinates of airfields that no longer existed. Margaret didn't answer. The propaganda films had shown what the Soviets did to German women. The Americans, they said, were little better, barbarians who chewed gum and played jazz music while bombing hospitals. She touched the small cyanide capsule sewn into her collar. Better than capture. Better than. The door exploded inward. American soldiers poured through, weapons raised, shouting in English. Margaret's hand went to her collar, but Ilse grabbed her wrist. "Don't," she hissed. "Not yet." The soldiers wore strange green uniforms, cleaner than anything Margaret had seen in months. One of them, barely older than a schoolboy, kept his rifle trained on them while speaking rapidly into a radio. His hands shook. He was afraid. Of them. Of 2 exhausted women in torn auxiliary uniforms. They were marched outside into the April morning. The air tasted of cordite and spring flowers, an impossible combination. Hundreds of other auxiliaries were already gathered in the courtyard, some from the anti-aircraft batteries, others from the Signal Corps. Greta Muller from the searchlight unit stood with her arms wrapped around herself, her uniform singed black along one sleeve. "Form lines," an American sergeant bellowed in accented German. "4 across. Keep your hands visible." The smell of diesel fuel from American trucks mixed with something else. Something Margrethe couldn't identify at first. It was the absence of a smell, no rotting flesh, no burning cities, just diesel and wildflowers and morning dew. They walked for 3 hours to a temporary holding area. Margrethe expected interrogation cells, perhaps torture. Instead, they found canvas tents arranged in neat rows. American soldiers distributed small packets. Inside, 2 chocolate bars, crackers, and something wrapped in green paper that smelled impossibly of real meat. "It's poisoned," Greta whispered. "It must be." But hunger won over fear. Margrethe bit into the chocolate, and the sweetness made her dizzy. Real cocoa. Real sugar. When had she last tasted sugar that didn't come from boiled beets? A tall American officer approached their group. Captain Morrison, his name tag read. His German was university learned, precise but oddly formal. "You will be transported to a prisoner facility. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force." Margrethe waited for the real message, the threats, the degradation. Instead, Morrison simply turned and left. That night, in the temporary camp, she lay on an actual cot with a clean blanket that smelled of industrial soap. Through the tent walls she could hear American soldiers playing cards, the clink of bottles, someone humming Glenn Miller. They didn't sound like monsters. They sounded bored. "They're fattening us up," Greta insisted to anyone who would listen, "like lambs before slaughter." But Ilse had found something in her ration packet, a small card with the Red Cross symbol. "It says we can write letters. They'll deliver them." "Lies!" Greta spat. 3 days later, they were loaded onto trains. Not cattle cars like the ones Margaret had seen heading east. Passenger cars with actual seats. The windows weren't even barred. Through them, she watched the German countryside roll past. Burned villages, crater-pocked fields, children in rags begging at crossings. Her Germany, broken and starving, while she sat on a cushioned seat eating American field rations. The shame burned worse than hunger ever had. At Mannheim, they transferred to a ship. The USS General Anderson, someone said. Margaret had never been on water before. The first night at sea, she vomited everything she'd eaten, the chocolate and meat and crackers mixing with bile. But even seasick, even miserable, she noticed the ship's latrines had toilet paper. Actual paper, not newspaper or leaves or nothing at all. "Where are they taking us?" Ilse asked one of the guards, a freckled boy from somewhere called Iowa. "States," he said, then seeing their confusion added, "America." America. The word rippled through the prisoners like electricity. America meant distance from the Soviet armies. But America also meant the unknown, the enemy homeland where anything could happen. On the 10th day at sea, something extraordinary occurred. The guards distributed small packages to each prisoner. Inside, a bar of soap, a toothbrush, toothpaste, and 2 pairs of clean underwear. Margaret held the soap to her nose. It smelled like lavender and lye, sharp and floral at once. She hadn't seen real soap since 1943. The last 2 years had been sand and cold water, or when lucky, a sliver of gray industrial cleanser that left skin raw. "It's a trick," Greta announced, but her voice wavered. She was holding her soap like a religious relic. That night, Margaret dreamed of her mother's garden in Heidelberg before the war. Lavender growing wild along the garden wall. Her brother Kurt picking apples, his university books scattered on the grass. All gone now. Kurt killed at Stalingrad. The house destroyed in an air raid. Mother dead from typhus in the refugee columns. She woke to find she'd been clutching the soap so tightly it had left an imprint in her palm. The Atlantic crossing took 18 days. Each morning brought new impossibilities. Hot breakfast, actual porridge with sugar, not watery soup with turnip peelings. The guards played baseball on deck during calm weather, and when a ball rolled toward the German women, a young corporal retrieved it with a mumbled, "Sorry, miss," in English. Miss, not prisoner, not Nazi. Miss. Margaret found herself assigned to kitchen duty with 7 other women. The American mess sergeant, a broad-shouldered man named Coleman from Alabama, showed them the storage rooms. Sacks of flour without sawdust mixed in. Crates of canned peaches. An entire refrigerated compartment full of beef. "This is for the crew?" Ilse asked in halting English. Coleman laughed, a deep rumble. "Hell no. This here's for y'all. Prisoners get the same rations as enlisted men. Geneva Convention and all that." The same rations. Margareta calculated quickly. That was more calories in a day than German civilians had seen in a week during the final months. She thought of the children begging at the train crossings, their bellies swollen with hunger, while she stood surrounded by American abundance. That afternoon, she heard jazz music drifting from the guards' quarters. The forbidden music of the enemy, the music that propaganda minister Goebbels had called degenerate Negro noise. But it didn't sound degenerate. It sounded like freedom and sadness mixed together, horns crying out over the ocean. "You like Benny Goodman?" asked Coleman when he caught her listening. She didn't know how to answer. 3 months ago, listening to American music was treason. Now she was sailing to America itself. The ship's doctor, Major Bernstein, conducted medical examinations. Margarete expected humiliation, the rough handling she'd heard Soviet troops gave German women. Instead, a female nurse stood present, and Bernstein kept his eyes professionally averted, checking only for diseases and malnutrition. He prescribed vitamins for most of them. Vitamins, as if they were patients, not prisoners. "You have old fractures in 2 fingers," he noted, examining her hands. "Untreated?" "A bombing raid, 2 years ago." He made notes. "We'll X-ray them properly at the camp. Might be able to reset them correctly." Fix them? The enemy wanted to fix her broken fingers? On the 15th day, Greta caused an incident. She'd been growing increasingly agitated as others began to relax, to chat with guards, to smile at the baseball games. During dinner, she stood and shouted in German, "You're all traitors, collaborators. They killed our families, and you eat their food like grateful dogs." The mess hall fell silent. The guards reached for their weapons, but didn't draw them. Captain Morrison appeared, evaluated the situation with cool eyes. "Solitary confinement?" Margarete expected to hear. Instead, Morrison said quietly in German, "Corporal Kruger, you're upset. Please sit down. We'll speak privately after dinner." Greta sat, shaking. Later, Margarete saw her leaving Morrison's office with red eyes but unharmed. The next day, Greta was quieter but still present, still eating the same food, still treated exactly the same. Land appeared on September 2nd. America. The women crowded the rails, staring at the approaching shore. No bomb craters, no burned cities. The port of Newport News, Virginia, bustled with prosperity. Ships unloading cargo, automobiles driving on intact roads, buildings standing whole and painted. "Look at it," Ilse whispered. "They never suffered at all." The unfairness of it stung. While German cities burned, while children starved, while everything collapsed into rubble and ash, America had remained untouched, wealthy, whole. This was the arsenal of democracy that had crushed them. Not through superior will or courage, but through sheer material abundance. They were loaded onto buses with windows that actually opened. The southern heat hit like a physical wall, nothing like the cool German September. The air smelled of pine trees and something sweet, honeysuckle, someone identified. Through the windows they saw small towns with shops open for business, people walking freely, children playing in yards. Fat children, clean children, children with shoes. Camp Blanding sprawled across thousands of acres of Florida scrubland. But instead of the expected barbed wire and guard towers with machine guns, they found neat wooden barracks, painted white, with screens on the windows. A flagpole with the American flag, a baseball diamond, gardens. "This is a prison?" Greta asked, incredulous. The camp commander, Colonel Williams, addressed them that first evening. He was older, gray-haired, with sad eyes. "You are prisoners of war. You will work, you will follow rules, you will be treated fairly. Any questions?" Margaret wanted to ask why. Why fairness for the enemy? But she stayed silent. They were assigned to Barrack 7. 24 women to a building that would have held 60 in a German military facility. Actual mattresses on the bunks, pillows with clean cases, 2 footlockers per person. The latrine had flush toilets, sinks with running water, and a separate room with 6 shower stalls. That first night, they were told they could shower. Margaret hadn't properly washed in 3 weeks aboard ship, only quick rinses with salt water. She entered the shower room with the others, turned the handle, and gasped. Hot water, endless hot water. And there, in a dish by each shower, fresh bars of soap. She picked one up with trembling hands. It was nothing special, standard military issue, but it lathered rich and white. The lavender scent rose with the steam. She scrubbed her skin, watching months of grime disappear down the drain. Her hair, matted and greasy, turned soft again. Clean. She was clean. Around her, women were crying. Tough women who had survived bombing raids, who had pulled bodies from rubble, who had manned anti-aircraft guns while their cities burned. All undone by soap and hot water. Ilse stood under her shower fully dressed, still in her tattered auxiliary uniform, letting the water soak through. "I want to wash it all away," she said. "Everything. The war, the hate, the fear. All of it." But some stains, Margaret knew, went deeper than skin. That night, clean and lying on an actual mattress, she stared at the ceiling and tried to understand. They were the enemy. They had served the regime that America had spent billions to destroy. Yet here they were, sleeping safe and clean while German civilians scavenged in ruins. Through the window screen came the sound of crickets and distant music from the Guards' recreation hall. Tommy Dorsey's orchestra playing "I'll Never Smile Again." The enemy's music in the enemy's land, and she was clean and fed and safe. The guilt was worse than hunger had ever been. Morning brought new revelations. Breakfast was eggs, real eggs, not powder, with bacon, toast, jam, and coffee with actual sugar. The coffee was weak by pre-war German standards, but it was real bean coffee, not the barley substitute they'd drunk for 3 years. "We eat better than we did before the war," Ilse observed, and several women hushed her, as if saying it aloud was betrayal. After breakfast, work assignments. Some would labor in the camp laundry, others in the kitchens, some in the vegetable gardens that supplemented their rations. Margaret was assigned to the administrative office, translating documents and camp communications. Her English, learned in gymnasium before the war, made her valuable. The office was run by Lieutenant Harper, a thin woman from Boston who spoke precise academic German. "You'll translate camp regulations, letters from the Red Cross, and help process mail," she explained. Mail. They could really write home. More incredibly, letters might actually be delivered. That afternoon, Margaret sat at an actual desk with a typewriter that worked, translating a document about prisoner rights. The right to send 2 letters and 4 postcards monthly. The right to receive packages. The right to medical care, to religious services, to file complaints about treatment. Rights. Prisoners had rights. Through the office window, she could see other prisoners tending the vegetable garden. Greta was among them, pulling weeds with vicious determination. Beyond the fence, which was more marker than barrier, American civilians drove past on the road. Some waved. The prisoners weren't hidden, weren't secret. They were simply there, part of the strange landscape of wartime America. The weeks folded into routine. Wake at 6 to a bugle call, not sirens warning of air raids. Shower with soap that never seemed to run out. Breakfast with portions that would have fed a German family for 2 days. Work that was boring, but not brutal. Evenings free to write letters, read books from the camp library, or attend English classes taught by volunteers from nearby towns. The first letters from home arrived in October. Margaret's came from her aunt in Hamburg, forwarded through the Red Cross. The paper was thin, cheap, the ink watered down. Hamburg was rubble. Food was distributed by occupation authorities, 750 calories a day if you were lucky. Former party members got no ration cards at all. People were burning furniture for warmth. Her cousin had been raped by Soviet soldiers during the first occupation before the British took over the sector. Margaret read the letter 3 times, then went to the latrine and vomited her breakfast of pancakes and syrup. The sweet taste turned bitter. She was gaining weight while her family starved. "It's not our fault," Ilse said that night, finding her crying in her bunk. "We didn't choose this." But choice was exactly the problem. They had chosen to serve, chosen to wear the uniform, chosen to enable the machine that had brought this destruction. The camp had a small theater where they showed movies twice a week. American films with German subtitles. Margaret watched Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn trade witty dialogue while eating popcorn, actual popped corn with butter. The abundance was obscene. The guard sitting 2 rows ahead laughed at the funny parts, his rifle leaning against the next seat, forgotten. One evening, Greta confronted her outside the mess hall. "You're becoming like them, speaking English, laughing at their films, forgetting what they did to Dresden, to Hamburg, to—" "I forget nothing," Margrethe interrupted. "But what would you have us do? Starve ourselves? Refuse to wash? Will that bring back the dead?" "It would show loyalty." "To what? To whom? The Führer is dead. The Reich is dead. Germany itself is carved into pieces. What's left to be loyal to?" Greta had no answer. November brought Thanksgiving, an American holiday none of them understood. The kitchen staff, including several German prisoners, prepared a feast. Turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie. More food on one table than Margaret had seen in years. Sergeant Coleman explained while carving turkey, "It's about being grateful. Pilgrims and Indians sharing a meal, putting aside differences." "But the Americans killed all the Indians later," Greta pointed out. Coleman's face darkened. "Yeah, we did. Don't mean the idea of gratitude is wrong, though." "Gratitude? For what? For captivity that was more comfortable than freedom had been? For soap and safety while Germany bled?" That night there was an incident. 3 women from Barracks 9 had been caught trying to seduce guards, offering themselves for cigarettes and chocolate to send home. The whole camp held its breath. This was the excuse the Americans needed to show their true nature, to punish, to humiliate. Instead, Colonel Williams addressed the camp. "Such behavior is inappropriate and will result in loss of privileges. The guards involved have been disciplined and transferred. Let me be clear, you are prisoners, not commodities. Your dignity will be respected, and you will respect yourselves." The 3 women lost commissary privileges for a month, but were otherwise unpunished. The guards who had encouraged them were court-martialed. They court-martialed their own men? For us? Ilse couldn't comprehend it. December arrived with news that made comprehension even harder. The Nuremberg trials had begun. Former leaders of the Reich stood accused of crimes against humanity. The radio in the recreation hall broadcast updates. Mass graves in Poland. Concentration camps where Jews and others were systematically murdered. Numbers so large they became meaningless. 6 million Jews. Millions more Soviet prisoners. Poles, Roma. "Propaganda," Greta insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Lieutenant Harper showed Margrethe photographs that had come through official channels. Skeletal figures behind barbed wire. Piles of bodies. Ovens designed for human beings. "Did you know?" Harper asked quietly. "We heard rumors about resettlement camps, labor camps. But this?" Margaret stared at a photograph of children's shoes piled higher than a house. "This is not war. This is something else." That night the barracks were silent, each woman alone with her thoughts, recalculating what they had served, what they had enabled through their service. The radio signals Margaret had transmitted, had they coordinated trains to these camps? The searchlights Greta had operated, had they protected the railways carrying cattle cars full of people to their deaths? A week before Christmas, packages arrived from the International Red Cross. Basic supplies, but also small luxuries: Swiss chocolate, Swedish soap, Portuguese sardines. Margrethe received a package from her aunt, too, forwarded through the Red Cross. Inside, wrapped in old newspaper, was her mother's locket, the only thing that survived the bombing. Her aunt's note was brief. She would want you to have it. Stay where you are safe. Stay where you are safe. In enemy hands. In enemy land. Christmas Eve, 1945. The camp chapel, yes, there was a chapel, held services in German. A Lutheran minister, himself a former Wehrmacht chaplain and fellow prisoner, preached about forgiveness and redemption. American guards attended too, sitting in the back rows. When they sang Stille Nacht, the Americans hummed along to the tune they knew as Silent Night. After the service, there was a Christmas party, a tree decorated with paper ornaments made by prisoners, real candles, cookies baked in the camp kitchen. Some guards brought their families, wives and children who lived in nearby towns. A little American girl, perhaps 5 years old, offered Margarete a cookie she had decorated herself, green frosting and too much sugar. Frohe Weihnachten, the child said in careful, practiced German. Margrethe took the cookie with trembling hands. An enemy child offering sweets to a prisoner. The world was upside down. That night, it snowed. Not much by German standards, but enough to dust the camp white. Margrethe stood outside the barracks with Ilse, catching snowflakes on their tongues like children. "I don't understand these Americans," Ilse said. "They destroy our cities, then feed us better than our own government did. They defeat us utterly, then give us soap and dignity. What kind of people are they?" Margrethe thought of Sergeant Coleman explaining Thanksgiving, of Lieutenant Harper's quiet questions, of the little girl's cookie. Maybe they're trying to prove something, to themselves, to us, to the world, that they're better than what we became. And are they? Margrethe didn't answer. She thought of the photographs from Nuremberg, of the ruins of Hamburg, of the soap that smelled like lavender. Better was too simple a word for the moral complexities they were drowning in. January brought new arrivals. Younger women, some barely 18, who had served in the final desperate months when the Reich threw everyone into the fight. They arrived expecting the worst and couldn't process the reality. One girl, Hannelore, stood in the shower room fully clothed, afraid to undress, convinced it was a trick. "It's real," Margrethe assured her. "The soap, the water, all of it, real." But Hannelore had been captured by Soviets first, held for 2 months before being traded to the Americans. She knew what male captors could do. It took 3 days before she believed the Americans were different. Work continued. Margrethe translated more documents, including testimonies from the Nuremberg trials. Each page was a revelation of systematic evil. The Einsatzgruppen reports, the Wannsee Conference notes, the careful bureaucratic language that disguised mass murder as administrative efficiency. "We didn't know," became the refrain in the barracks. But hadn't they? The Jews who disappeared from their neighborhoods, the trains heading east, the smell that hung over certain towns, the things they chose not to see, not to ask about. Lieutenant Harper never accused, never condemned. She just placed document after document on Margaret's desk for translation. Let the words do their own work. February brought unexpected news. Some prisoners were being offered early repatriation if they agreed to work in reconstruction efforts in the American zone. The alternative was to remain in camp for an indefinite period, months, possibly years, until the political situation stabilized. The camp divided. Some, like Greta, wanted immediate return regardless of conditions. Others, looking at letters describing starvation and rubble, wondered if staying was the better choice. "We're safe here," Ilse argued. "Fed, warm, clean. What's waiting for us in Germany? Occupation, hunger, shame." "Our families are waiting," Greta countered. "Our duty is to help rebuild." Duty, the word that had led them all here in the first place. One evening, Margrethe found herself in an unexpected conversation with Sergeant Coleman in the kitchen. He was making bread for the next day, his large hands gentle with the dough. "You ever think about staying?" he asked. "I mean, after all this is over, America's got room. Lots of Germans came here before the war." "We're enemies." "We're enemies. War's over. Now you're just people who need to figure out what comes next." "After what we did? After what was done in our name?" Coleman was quiet for a moment, kneading steadily. "My granddaddy fought for the Confederacy. fought to keep human beings as property, lost, spent the rest of his life trying to make amends, teaching former slaves to read. Can't undo the past, can only try to do better going forward. That night, Margaret lay awake thinking about Coleman's grandfather, about choosing to do better, about the soap and the snow and the little girl's cookie, about the photographs from Nuremberg and the letters from Hamburg, about the impossible distance between who they had been and who they might become. March 1946 brought the moment of decision. The repatriation lists were posted. Those who volunteered for reconstruction work would leave within the month. The others would remain indefinitely. Margaret stood before the list with a pencil that weighed more than mountains. She thought of her aunt's words. Stay where you are safe. She thought of the photographs from Nuremberg, each one a weight on her conscience. She thought of Sergeant Coleman's grandfather teaching reading as penance. The pencil trembled in her hand. You're actually considering staying? Greta stood behind her, disbelief sharp in her voice. I'm considering everything. They killed your brother at Normandy. They burned your city. And you want to remain with them? They feed children in their occupied zones while German administrators let them starve. They give prisoners soap while our own government gave us lies. Who are they and who are we anymore, Greta? That afternoon, a fight broke out in Barracks 9. 2 women, one signing for repatriation, one refusing. They rolled in the dirt, clawing and screaming about honor and betrayal, until American guards pulled them apart. Neither was punished beyond a stern warning. Even in anger, the Americans maintained their strange mercy. Margaret found herself in Colonel Williams' office, translating for a group of new arrivals. The colonel was explaining camp rules when one woman spat at his feet. American pig, you destroy everything, then pretend kindness. The room tensed. Williams' aide reached for his sidearm, but the colonel simply handed the woman his handkerchief. You're angry. That's understandable, but you'll find we prefer to build rather than destroy. Clean yourself up. Dinner is in an hour. After the women left, Williams sat heavily in his chair. Margarete was about to leave when he spoke. My son died in the Ardennes, 20 years old, his tank hit by a Panzerfaust. She froze. I volunteered for this position, he continued. People asked why I'd want to care for German prisoners. You want to know the truth? Margarete nodded, unable to speak. Because hatred is exhausting. Because my boy died fighting against fascism, not against German girls who got caught up in something bigger than they understood. Because maybe, just maybe, if we treat you with the dignity your government denied its enemies, some of you will go home and remember. Build something better. That evening, the camp watched a newsreel about rebuilding efforts in Europe. Berlin in ruins, children playing in bomb craters, but also American trucks delivering food, British doctors treating German civilians, French engineers helping restore water systems. The Marshall Plan, they called it. Help instead of vengeance. Guilt, Greta muttered. They feel guilty for the bombing. But Margaret wondered if it was something else, something Coleman had said about doing better going forward. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A delegation of American church women from Jacksonville bringing donated clothes for the prisoners. They smiled nervously. These enemy civilians meeting enemy prisoners. One elderly woman approached Margaret. I lost my nephew in Italy, she said quietly. But Christ teaches forgiveness. The clothes aren't much, but they're clean. Everyone deserves clean clothes. Margaret accepted a simple cotton dress, blue with small flowers. It smelled of lavender soap and American kindness. She wanted to say something profound about war and forgiveness, but all that came out was thank you. That night, Ilse made her decision. I'm staying, at least for now. My whole family is dead. There's nothing to return to but rubble and shame. Coward, Greta said, but even she seemed uncertain. Maybe, Ilse admitted, or maybe I'm just tired of being brave for the wrong causes. The first repatriation group left on March 15th. Margrethe watched them board buses, clutching Red Cross packages and letters of safe passage. Greta was among them, her jaw set with determination. At the last moment, she turned back. "I don't forgive them," she called to Margrethe. "I'll never forgive them." "I don't think they're asking for forgiveness," Margrethe replied. "They're offering something else." "What?" "A chance to become someone different than who we were." Greta boarded without another word. Half the camp emptied over the next week. Those who remained fell into new patterns. English classes became more serious. If they stayed, they'd need the language. Some women started correspondence courses offered by American universities. The future, impossible to imagine months ago, began taking tentative shape. April 1946. Spring came to Florida with explosive beauty. Flowers Margrethe couldn't name bloomed everywhere. The air smelled of growth instead of decay. She was assigned to help process new arrivals, German scientists and technicians brought to America for their expertise. They arrived expecting punishment and found themselves in comfortable quarters, their knowledge valued, their families protected. "Operation Paperclip," Lieutenant Harper explained. "We're recruiting German expertise for the space program, medical research, engineering." Even though we were enemies? Enemies can become allies. Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, now we're helping them rebuild. Italy was Axis, now they're getting Marshall Plan aid. The world changes. People adapt. One of the scientists, Dr. Friedrich Brenner, had worked on rocket programs. Margrethe translated his intake interview. He spoke of Peenemünde, of V-2 rockets, carefully avoiding mention of slave labor in underground factories. But when asked about his future plans, his voice broke. "I want to build rockets that reach the moon, not London. I want to explore, not destroy." "Then you've come to the right place," his interviewer said. That evening, Margrethe stood in the shower, letting hot water run over her skin, breathing lavender steam. She thought about transformation, about Dr. Brenner's rockets reaching for stars instead of cities, about Coleman's grandfather teaching former slaves, about enemy women given soap and safety when revenge would have been easier. She made her decision. The next morning, she requested extended residence papers. Lieutenant Harper helped her fill out the forms. "You could apply for immigration eventually. Many Germans do. Start fresh." After what we were part of? America's built on second chances, sometimes third and fourth chances too. May brought Germany's first anniversary of surrender. The camp held a memorial service, not celebrating victory, but mourning all the dead. American guards and German prisoners stood together in silence. Someone had made a wreath of Florida wildflowers. It seemed right somehow, beauty growing from foreign soil. Letters from home grew darker. The full extent of destruction was becoming clear. 2 million German women raped. Millions of refugees. Industry destroyed. Currency worthless. The country divided between 4 occupying powers who trusted each other less each day. Greta wrote once. Conditions were worse than the final war months. She didn't write again. Meanwhile, Margrethe learned to type on an American typewriter, to take shorthand in English, to navigate the strange optimism of American culture. The camp library got new books, not just in German, but English novels she slowly learned to read. Hemingway and Fitzgerald, writing about other wars and other lost generations. June marked a full year since capture. Margrethe looked at herself in the mirror. Her face had filled out, the hollow cheeks gone. Her hands, once raw from cold and malnutrition, were soft from office work. She wore the blue flowered dress from the church women. She looked like someone who had never served a dictatorship, never transmitted signals for a war machine, never chosen not to see trains heading east. But memory remained, sharp as glass. That evening, unexpected news. Colonel Williams was retiring, returning to his farm in Georgia. He gathered the remaining prisoners for a farewell. You've been model prisoners. Some of you will stay in America, others will eventually return to Germany. Either way, remember this. Democracy isn't perfect, but it allows for change, for growth, for admitting mistakes and trying to fix them. Your country forgot that. Don't forget it again. His replacement, Colonel Bradley, was younger, less personally invested. The camp ran the same, but something indefinable had shifted. The war was moving from memory into history. July brought oppressive heat and a job offer. The Jacksonville shipyard needed translators for their international contracts. They would sponsor Margaret's work visa if she accepted. Real employment, real wages, a real apartment in town. You'd hire a German prisoner? She asked the recruiter. You'd be hiring a skilled translator who happens to be German. The war is over, miss. Time to move on. Move on, as if it were that simple. She accepted. August 1946, her last month in camp. Other women were getting similar offers. Hospitals needed nurses, schools needed language teachers, businesses needed workers. America was absorbing its former enemies like a sponge absorbing water, transforming them into something useful. Ilsa got a position with a Miami import company. "We're becoming Americans," she said one evening, half amazed, half horrified. How did this happen? Soap, Margaret said, only half joking. It started with soap. The last Sunday in camp, Margarete attended chapel. The Lutheran minister, who would return to Germany next month, preached about redemption through grace. We cannot earn forgiveness for what was done. We can only accept grace when offered and try to live worthy of it. Sergeant Coleman was there, as he often was. After the service, he handed Margaret a small package. Inside was a bar of lavender soap and a note. For your new apartment. Remember, everybody deserves to be clean. September 3rd, 1946. Exactly 1 year after she'd wept in the shower, Margaret walked out of Camp Blanding a free woman. She carried one suitcase of donated clothes, her mother's locket, and documents declaring her a legal resident alien. The September heat hit like a wall, but she barely noticed. At the bus station, she hesitated. A ticket to Jacksonville and a new life, or somehow find a way back to Germany and whatever remained there. The choice was hers now, not made by officers or governments or war. She bought the ticket to Jacksonville. The apartment was small, 2 rooms above a bakery. It came furnished with basic furniture and, she almost laughed, a bar of soap by the kitchen sink. She set Coleman's lavender soap beside it. 2 soaps. Such wealth. That evening she wrote a letter to her aunt. I am safe. I am free. I am trying to become someone better than I was. Perhaps that is all any of us can do. 10 years later, 1956. Margaret, now Margaret, stood in a Miami courthouse, raising her right hand to take the oath of citizenship. Ilsa stood beside her, both of them transformed by a decade of American life. They had jobs, savings accounts, even automobiles. Ilsa had married an American engineer who knew her history and married her anyway. After the ceremony, they drove to the beach. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, the same ocean they'd crossed as prisoners. Margaret pulled something from her purse, a small, worn bar of lavender soap, barely a sliver now. She'd kept it all these years, a reminder. You still have that? Ilsa asked. It reminds me that enemies can choose kindness, that people can change, that even after the worst, there can be grace. She threw the soap sliver into the ocean, watching it disappear into the waves. Somewhere, on the other side of that water, Germany was rebuilding as a democracy. Former enemies were now allies. The world had chosen Marshall Plans over Versailles treaties, soap over vengeance. Margaret walked back to her car, an American citizen who had once been the enemy, cleaned by simple soap and unexpected mercy. Behind her, the Atlantic waves washed the beach clean, over and over, like history trying to absolve itself, one wave at a time.